Hi, I'm Jessalyn Hayes, and today we are here with City Council candidate Nicholas Da Silva. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So I want to start from the beginning. I know you're a recent VCU graduate.
Yeah.
So what made you, want to run for City Council?
So about a year ago on May 14th, we saw Marcus David Peters, who is a black school teacher in the city of Richmond. He was killed by the Richmond police when he was having a mental health crisis. And what we saw afterwards was, for this over a year-long process, we had two huge marches downtown. We had rallies where thousands of community members came out, and there was this massive push for just basic reforms, really. Changes in the police accountability process, in the police training program, trying to make sure something like that could not happen again. And what we've seen over this last year is the mayor and the city council's people and the chief of police have been totally silent on the issue. We've seen nothing introduced, no talk, no discussion from our elected officials on how we could address that. And it's made me realize that a lot of the hard questions, whether it's public education, public housing right now, public transportation, a lot of these issues don't get heard, and the community voices are not heard at all. And so I realized there are a lot of issues like those where if I don't speak up for them and I don't address these hard questions, no one else is going to. And so it motivated me to run in this election. Yeah.
That's awesome. So going off of that, I know the mayor last year proposed to raise the real estate tax.
Right.
It didn't go through, but what would your plan be to balance the city budget?
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple things that need to be addressed. Firstly, a lot of the taxes that we are able to use or able to put forward or propose in the city of Richmond are regressive. Things like the meals tax and the cigarette tax, and in a lot of cases, the real estate tax, they are putting more of a burden on working class members of our community, people who can't afford, people on fixed incomes, a lot of elderly residents. They're putting the burden on people who can't afford it, and so it's having more of a negative effect than it is a positive effect. The main thing that I want to be focusing on in terms of changing our tax system is working with the General Assembly. These past 2 years, I have worked at the General Assembly. I've worked with legislators there. I've also, this last session, I helped pass 2 bills on higher education to help get more student voices involved in the administration of colleges, but also to freeze public tuition. And what we've seen is it is possible to make changes via the state legislature for Richmond, changes that are progressive or push our tax system forward, but we need to be willing to actually work with legislators. We need to be lobbying on behalf of these bills, because right now what we're capable of doing in Richmond is not enough. We need to be pushing for progressive taxation, putting more of the tax burden on people who can afford it. We need to be taxing corporations in the city, corporations like Dominion and others that are putting a heavy burden, and they're also taking a lot of resources and using the capital and labor of Richmond, but they're not giving back necessarily as much as they could be. And so that's what I want to see done more than anything else, because right now what we have is not a sustainable long-term tax plan.
Great. All right. So one of the big issues that we've heard about lately is the Navy Hill redevelopment, which is, of course, the major overhaul of the Coliseum. Where are you at on that? I know there's a lot of different opinions, but Where are you at?
So I was the very first candidate to come out in opposition to this. This plan really from almost the beginning has been, I think, disastrous for Richmond. Even from the beginning, we had red flags when I saw it as being proposed by the CEO of Dominion Energy. That made me want to dig into it more. And as the process of introducing the project to the public played out and we found out more details, from how they're trying to fund it with this tax model that's going to take real estate taxes from downtown and for the next 20 years use it to pay off the Coliseum. That has been used in places like Chicago and Baltimore, and more than anything, it has profited for private developers and for corporations, but it has brought back very meager returns for cities. Even beyond that, we've seen very, very concerning things coming out of the introduction process, out of the community input, for lack of a better phrase, process for the Coliseum project. In terms of VCU, we've recently seen VCU President Michael Rao was actually discovered that he had taken a op-ed that was written by the developers of the project and put his name on it, put it out as his own words. We've seen a number of different moneyed interests from the mayor's administration to the corporations involved in the project trying to push it. We've seen meetings be moved at last minute to far away from City Hall. We've seen all these different tactics that have been put forward to try to get through the project as fast as possible with as little oversight as possible. We've collected over 600 surveys of the issues from people across the 5th District so far. 90% of people approximately are not in favor of this project when I ask them about it. And really, it has been surprising to me to see how far it's gone with such little support. And so I would not support the project in its current form. I would not vote for it, and I absolutely would need to see some fundamental changes to the project, how it's structured, how it's funded, before I would think of passing it forward.
Okay, great. Yeah. So as the youngest candidate, you seem to know a lot about everything, right, which is obviously good. But as the youngest candidate, we see a trend of young people not going to the polls. A lot of their mentalities is, oh, I'm just one person, I'm not really going to make a difference. But when you look big picture, that can add up to be thousands of young voters aren't going to the polls.
To address the second part of your question about what I would say, I mean, honestly, this is what I say to my roommates and my friends because I have this conversation often. I feel like a lot of people my age, it's understandable that we're very jaded. For a lot of people my age, our first election was Donald Trump. And that has a large effect. I don't know if you remember, but just after that happened, there were thousands of students who came out in protest of that election just at VCU alone. And I think a lot of people are very disappointed in our electoral system. I know last election cycle, we saw VCU was the most registered college campus in all of Virginia. That gave me a lot of hope. I know it has had a serious, major effect both for local elections and for statewide elections, the student vote. I think I would say to everyone who's registered to vote, absolutely find out where your polling place is, find out who the candidates are, definitely get informed because especially in this local race, especially with all the statewide races coming up, I know there is a candidate you would want to vote for. So I would definitely check it out because we can have a huge effect.
Right. I agree. So I've asked you a lot about some current pressing issues in Richmond, but as a candidate, what would you want to do or see Richmond prioritize in the next few years? And then what are your plans for the 5th District?
Right. So what we've been focusing on throughout this campaign is from an overall level, we want to see way more community input in the whole process. You talk about every issue from police accountability to the bus routes to traffic to public housing to poverty. And the core of that is that people are not the main driver of policy in local government. As we've been out talking to more people, we have been able to develop our platform based on what people want to see. What I would like to see prioritized in Richmond, I would like to see prioritized public education. Our Richmond public schools have been neglected for decades. There are serious systemic issues, both in racial disparities and class disparities in a lot of our schools, even from north side to south side, which are both represented in the 5th District. There are massive disparities in how that is funded. I would also like to see more attention put on public housing. I actually just came from a press release we did where we were talking about the massive evictions that are happening right now in our public housing courts. I have talked to a lot of public housing residents within the 5th, and a lot of them feel they are neglected, they're left behind, they're not heard. They feel like they don't have a voice and that they have no stability in their housing. And so I would like to see actual emphasis being placed on the participation of public housing residents and people who need public housing in the planning process. Because right now we're seeing public housing potentially being threatened with destruction. And beyond those things, beyond the basics of what we need to see, I would also like to see a reprioritization of community voices in terms of our city planning. in terms of our environmental impact. I was talking to people on South Side on Semmes Avenue, and we're looking at Semmes Avenue is kind of the perfect example of a place that could be redesigned with different urban design to change it both environmentally and for livability. Right now, it is basically it's a 35 mile per hour zone,
right.
and people go straight down that straightaway like it's a highway. When we were canvassing there, we saw 3 different accidents happen. And so if we redesign that street, if we put more emphasis on public transportation and accessibility there and across our city, then we can actually see those changes happen, in a domino effect. Absolutely, the main thing I want to be focusing on personally as a candidate and as a representative is I want to be working full time. Most city councils people work part time, but as someone who has, I understand that $25,000 is certainly not a living wage, but it's something as someone who lives with 4 roommates, who has a beater car and has to take the bus pretty often. That is something I can live on, and I think it's what the people of the 5th District deserve in order to make progress towards actually having everyone's voices heard. I say often to people, if you take 30 people from any neighborhood, take 30 random people, they will know collectively more about how to change things in their neighborhood, about the solutions and the problems than the smartest person you could put on city council. And that is what we need to move forward with, because that will have a longer impact than any one person or campaign or candidate could possibly have.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know we were very excited to have a VCU grad.
Yeah.
So wish you the best of luck in the elections.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be on.